My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what is being revealed to you now did not come to you by accident. Something has been moving quietly around your name. Something has been passing through the thoughts of a person who tried to act normal, tried to stay silent, tried to pretend they were not affected by you, but heaven saw what their mouth refused to confess. They noticed you, not just once, not in a small way, not casually, like someone glancing at a stranger and forgetting a moment later. They noticed the way you carry yourself. They noticed the way your presence enters a space before your words do. They noticed the way your style speaks without begging for attention. And then, when they could no longer keep that observation locked inside their chest, they told someone about you. But listen closely, because this was not just a simple conversation. It was not just, I saw them. It was not just, they looked nice. No. There was something in their voice when they spoke about you. A shift, a softness, a hesitation, a secret emotional weight hiding behind ordinary words. They tried to make it sound casual, but their spirit betrayed them. The person they told could feel it. They could hear that you were not just a passing thought. They could hear that your name had touched a place inside them they were not ready to explain. And the part you do not know is this. The moment they started talking about your style, they were really talking about the way you made them feel. Because your style was only the doorway. Your appearance was only the first sign. The deeper truth is that something about you disturbed their silence. Something about you interrupted the version of life they thought they had control over. They saw you, and for a moment, the noise around them faded. They saw something in your presence that felt familiar and impossible at the same time, and they did not understand why. They only knew they kept looking. They kept remembering. They kept replaying small details. The way you dressed, the way you stood, the way you moved as if you were carrying invisible storms with quiet grace. The way you looked like someone who had been through things, yet still had a light that refused to disappear. And heaven wants you to know this now because you have been underestimating the impact of your presence. You thought you were unnoticed. You thought your effort did not matter. You thought nobody saw the little ways you tried to hold yourself together. But someone saw more than you realized. They saw the color, the detail, the energy, the difference. They saw how you were not trying to be like everyone else. And something inside them whispered. There is something about this person. They did not say it loudly. Not at first. They tried to swallow the thought. They tried to look away. They tried to convince themselves it was nothing. But the memory followed them. It followed them into silence. It followed them into conversations. It followed them when they were alone. And then, without planning to, they spoke your name. Or if they did not say your name, they described you. They described your look. They described your energy. They described the way you stood out. But what they did not realize is that heaven was listening to that conversation. And heaven heard what was hidden underneath every word. They were not only describing your style, they were revealing their attention. They were revealing their curiosity. They were revealing that something about you had entered their heart before they gave it permission. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because the person they told did not respond the way they expected. That person noticed something. They noticed the change in their tone. They noticed the way your soulmate became careful while speaking about you. They noticed how they tried to hide emotion behind a small laugh. They noticed how they acted like it was just a comment, while their eyes said something deeper. And that person may have asked them a simple question. Why are you noticing them so much? And in that moment, your soulmate became quiet. Because the answer was not ready, because the truth was too close. Because sometimes the soul recognizes what the mind is still trying to deny. My message to you is this. You have been seen in a way you did not expect. Not because you were trying to impress, not because you were begging for attention, but because authenticity carries a spiritual fragrance. And yours reached someone. Your style carried a story. It spoke of your battles. It spoke of your healing. It spoke of the person you are becoming. It spoke of the confidence you are still learning to wear. And even when you felt unsure, heaven says there was something beautiful about the way you showed up. Something brave. Something rare. Something unforgettable. Your soulmate could not stop noticing because their spirit was not only seeing fabric, color, shape, or outward appearance. Their spirit was sensing alignment. Their spirit was sensing destiny. Their spirit was sensing that your presence carries a message they were not prepared to receive. That is why they told someone. Because when something touches the soul deeply enough, silence becomes heavy. And their silence became too heavy. They had to release a piece of it. But they did not release the whole truth. Not yet. They only released enough to test the air. Enough to see how it sounded outside their own mind. Enough to see if someone else would confirm what they were feeling. And the response they received made them think even more. Because the person they told may have smiled, or paused, or looked at them with knowing eyes. And suddenly your soulmate realized something terrifying and beautiful. They had been noticed too. Their feelings had been noticed. Their attention toward you had been exposed. And now they cannot easily pretend anymore. They cannot go back to complete ignorance. They cannot fully convince themselves that you are just another person. Because once the heart says something out loud, even softly, it becomes real in a new way. And heaven is showing you this because there is a conversation about you that opened a door. A door they thought was still locked. A door connected to confession, emotion, and movement. But the full truth of what was said after your name came up. That is the part heaven has not revealed completely yet. Because what happened next changed the way they saw you. And it may change the way they come toward you. The strange thing is that the conversation should have ended there. A simple comment. A passing observation. A few ordinary words exchanged between two people before moving on to something else. That is what your soulmate expected. That is what they hoped would happen. But heaven saw something different unfolding. Because after your name entered that conversation, it refused to leave. The subject kept returning. The thought kept resurfacing. And no matter how hard your soulmate tried to steer their attention elsewhere, something kept pulling them back toward the memory of you. Not because they wanted to become obsessed. Not because they planned for this to happen. But because some connections begin long before two people fully understand what they are feeling. There are moments when the soul notices something before the mind can explain it. And that is exactly where your soulmate found themselves. Caught between logic and emotion. Caught between certainty and confusion. Caught between telling themselves it meant nothing and secretly wondering why it felt like it meant everything. The person they spoke to could see it, far more clearly than your soulmate realized. Sometimes the people around us recognize our feelings before we do. Sometimes they hear emotions hiding between sentences. And that person heard them. Every hesitation. Every change in tone. Every attempt to sound casual. Every effort to hide excitement. They heard it all. And eventually, they said something that caused your soulmate's heart to skip. Not physically. Not dramatically. But internally. The kind of reaction that happens when someone accidentally speaks a truth you have been avoiding. The kind of reaction that leaves a person staring into silence afterward. Because suddenly the thing they were trying not to feel became harder to ignore. My child, there are moments in life when heaven allows mirrors to appear. Not mirrors made of glass. Mirrors made of people. People who reflect back the emotions we have been hiding from ourselves. And during that conversation, your soulmate was looking into one of those mirrors. The person speaking with them unknowingly reflected something back. Something uncomfortable. something exciting, something impossible to unhear. And after the conversation ended, your soulmate walked away carrying a different feeling than before, because now they were no longer wondering only about your appearance. They were wondering about you, the real you, the person behind the style, the person behind the smile, the person behind the energy they could not stop remembering. Questions began appearing, small questions at first, simple questions, but questions have power. Because questions open doors, and once curiosity enters the heart, it rarely leaves quietly. They wondered what makes you laugh. They wondered what hurts you. They wondered what dreams you keep hidden from the world. They wondered what kind of days shaped you into the person you are now. And without realizing it, they crossed an invisible line. A line separating attraction from interest. A line separating observation from emotional investment. Because people do not ask those kinds of questions about someone they intend to forget. The soul asks those questions when it is moving closer. Closer than logic intended. Closer than fear prefers. Closer than pride wants to admit. Meanwhile, you were living your life. You may have been dealing with challenges. You may have been carrying worries. You may have been questioning your future. You may have been wondering whether anyone truly sees you. Yet behind the scenes, your existence was creating ripples you could not see. And heaven wants you to understand something important. Many of the things that make you powerful are things you barely notice about yourself. You notice your flaws. Others notice your light. You notice your mistakes. Others notice your strength. You notice what still needs healing. Others notice how far you have already come. Your soulmate noticed something deeper than clothes. Something deeper than appearance. Something deeper than style. Style was simply the language through which your spirit introduced itself. Because the soul often speaks before words are exchanged. And when two destinies begin moving toward one another, signs appear in unexpected ways. A glance, a memory, a conversation, a feeling that refuses to disappear. What seemed small was never small. What seemed ordinary was never ordinary. Because heaven can hide extraordinary beginnings inside ordinary moments. That is one of its favorite things to do. To plant significance where nobody expects it. To hide future chapters inside seemingly forgettable encounters. To create stories that only make sense when looking backward. And your soulmate is beginning to realize that the moment they noticed you may have been more important than they first believed. This realization did not arrive all at once. It arrived slowly, quietly, like dawn entering a dark room, like a distant melody becoming louder, like a whisper that keeps repeating until it can no longer be ignored. And each day that followed, another piece fell into place. Another memory surfaced. Another detail returned. Another reason appeared. The strange part is that your soulmate tried to challenge their own thoughts. They tried to be reasonable. They tried to convince themselves that they were imagining things. But every attempt created the opposite effect. Because the harder they pushed away the thought of you, the more clearly they remembered you. And that frustrated them. It confused them. It unsettled them. Yet it also fascinated them. Because some people leave an impression, but very few people leave an imprint. An impression fades. An imprint remains. And heaven says you became an imprint. Not through effort. Not through performance. Not through chasing. But through authenticity. You were simply being yourself. And somehow that became unforgettable. Days passed. Perhaps weeks. Maybe longer. Yet the conversation continued echoing in their mind. Not every word. Just certain moments. Certain reactions. Certain observations. The way the other person looked at them. The way they responded. The way they seemed to understand something your soulmate was still trying to understand themselves. And eventually another thought emerged. A thought they were not prepared for. a thought they immediately tried to dismiss. But it returned. Again, and again, and again. What if this means something? What if there is a reason I keep noticing them? What if this is not random? What if this feeling did not appear by accident? Those questions began quietly, but heaven knows that powerful journeys often begin with quiet questions, and those questions opened yet another door, a door leading toward possibility, a door leading toward hope, a door leading toward a future your soulmate could barely imagine. Yet even as curiosity grew, fear remained nearby, because every meaningful connection awakens fear, fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of caring too much, fear of hoping too much, fear of discovering that the feeling is real. And your soulmate found themselves standing between those fears and the growing truth inside their heart. Part of them wanted to move closer. Part of them wanted to stay protected. Part of them wanted answers. Part of them wanted distance. The battle became internal, invisible to everyone else. But heaven saw every moment, every late night thought, every replayed memory. Every quiet smile they never explained. Every moment they found themselves wondering what you were doing. Every moment they caught themselves thinking about you when they should have been focused elsewhere. And what they do not fully understand yet is that this story is still unfolding. Because the conversation where they mentioned your style was not the end. It was the beginning of a chain of events, the beginning of realizations. The beginning of discoveries, the beginning of emotions that would continue growing long after that first conversation ended. But there is one detail heaven has not fully revealed, one detail connected to what happened after they spoke about you, because someone said something, a specific observation, a specific sentence, a specific remark that caused your soulmate to go completely silent, not because they disagreed. Not because they were offended, but because the words touched a truth they had been trying not to face. And when those words landed, everything changed. The atmosphere changed. The questions changed. The way they looked at you changed. The way they looked at themselves changed. And the full meaning of those words is about to become impossible for them to ignore. But that revelation belongs to the next part of this story. Because what was said next did not simply deepen their feelings. It forced them to confront something about you that they had secretly been afraid to admit. There are certain moments in a person's life that seem small while they are happening. A few words, a simple observation, a passing conversation, nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, nothing that appears powerful enough to change the direction of someone's heart. And yet heaven knows that some of the greatest turning points arrive disguised as ordinary moments. This was one of them, because after that conversation, after the questions, after the quiet curiosity that continued growing inside your soulmate, there came a moment they never expected, a moment that returned to them over and over again, a moment they could not shake, a moment connected to something another person said about you. The words themselves were simple, but the impact was not, because sometimes a truth becomes impossible to avoid once another voice speaks it aloud. Your soulmate had been carrying thoughts about you privately. They had been keeping them locked away where nobody could examine them too closely, hidden behind logic, hidden behind caution, hidden behind excuses. But once someone else noticed what was happening, those walls became harder to maintain. The protection began cracking, the distance began shrinking, the defenses began weakening, and heaven watched it happen. Not because heaven was forcing anything, but because heaven often reveals what people are already carrying inside themselves. And your soulmate was carrying more than they realized. Far more. They had convinced themselves that they were only noticing your appearance, only noticing your style, only noticing the way you presented yourself. But deep inside, another process had already started. A much deeper process. A much more meaningful one. Because while they thought they were observing your outward appearance, their spirit was quietly studying your energy. And energy cannot be forgotten as easily as appearances. Energy lingers. Energy remains. Energy follows people home. Energy enters memories and stays there long after details begin fading. That is what happened to your soulmate. Certain details disappeared, but the feeling remained. The feeling became stronger, and that frightened them more than they would ever admit openly. Because feelings create responsibility. Feelings demand honesty. Feelings ask questions people are often afraid to answer. Especially when those feelings arrive unexpectedly. Especially when they arrive through someone they never planned on caring about. My beloved listener, there are times when people think they are protecting themselves by avoiding the truth. But avoidance does not stop destiny. Avoidance only delays understanding. And your soulmate was entering a season where understanding could no longer be postponed forever. The signs kept appearing. Not dramatic signs. Not supernatural displays. Not impossible coincidences. Just small reminders. Tiny moments. Unexpected thoughts. Random memories. Little things that kept bringing your presence back into focus. A song. A color. A place. A conversation. A familiar feeling. Something would happen, and suddenly they would remember you again. And every time it happened, the same question returned. Why? Why am I still thinking about them? Why does this keep happening? Why can't I completely let this go? Why do they keep appearing in my thoughts? The questions multiplied, and with each question, the emotional distance became smaller. That is when another realization began forming. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. At first, they resisted it. Then they questioned it. Then they analyzed it. Then they tried to explain it away. But eventually the realization became too obvious. They were no longer interested only in how you looked. They were interested in who you are. That realization changed everything. Because appearance creates attraction. But identity creates connection. Appearance captures attention. But character captures the heart. And somewhere along the journey, your soulmate crossed that invisible bridge. Opening up did not make the feeling go away. It made it stronger. That is the part that unsettled them most. They thought speaking a little might release the pressure. They thought saying something might help them feel lighter and move on. But instead, the truth expanded. Because honesty does not bury love. Honesty gives love room to breathe. And once it breathed, it became clearer. They realized your name still carries emotion. They realized your memory still has power. They realized their heart still responds. They realized the story is not finished inside them. And now, they are left with the question heaven has placed before them. Will they keep living as if unfinished things do not matter, or will they finally step into the conversation their soul has been avoiding? This is why part 1 cannot close with comfort alone. It must close with the truth of the cliff edge they are standing on. Because last night, after they opened up, after the conversation ended, after the room quieted, after they were left with themselves, your person came very close to doing something. Very close. Their hand may have reached for the phone. Their mind may have formed the first words. Their heart may have pushed them toward a message they were not sure they were ready to send. And for one suspended moment, heaven watched them stand between fear and courage. They did not forget you in that moment. They did not move on from you in that moment. They stood there with your name pressing against their spirit, feeling that if they took one more step, everything could change. And then something happened inside them that heaven has not fully revealed yet. A memory returned. A specific memory. One they had buried beneath pride, silence, and time. And that memory is the reason their next move may be closer than you think.